In at 10, Shazam's admission. During a crossover between DC's beloved Batman and Shazam, Billy ends up trying to help Batman stop Scarecrow, but does something reckless in the process, resulting in Batman reaming him out for it, saying, quote, "Scarecrow is one of the most dangerous people on the planet. If he'd released that toxin into the airstream, all of Gotham would have been," but gets cut off by Billy in one of the most tear-jerking admissions in comics. Quote, "I know. Shazam! I'm sorry, okay? I'm just a kid. I don't know what to do. I never know what to do. I have all this power and most of the time I'm just messing up or punching crocodiles or something. I feel like I'm wasting it, like I was never supposed to have it, but I don't know. I do have it, so I just want to help. I need to help." Honestly, it was a very emotional scene. I don't know if Batman knew about Billy being a kid before this or not, but you can just sense how guilty Billy feels about everything. He's just a kid that wants to help. And at 9, Jason Todd. Jason Todd died by voters calling in to decide whether he would live or die, and his death was tragic for many reasons. Not only did most deem the vote unfair and cynical, but felt like it was a little too dark. However, for many, Jason had never been more interesting than he was right before he died, and it was his death that caused an increased sense of actually having a good character that eventually made him popular enough to come back. Jason would most likely not be as loved as he is today if he hadn't have died, because his death is like one of the biggest moments in DC history, and outside of that, it made him the character he is today. The iconic images of Batman holding his impressively intact corpse are one that have gone down in comic history, and he was also seemingly the first person to stay dead in comics and really set the stage for actual stakes now that characters wouldn't come back. He eventually did, but it was still an emotional death to read and something that I would hate to go through. And at 8, Flashpoint's ending. Flashpoint, a timeline of Barry Allen's own creation where his mother doesn't die and he thus doesn't become the Flash. Oh, and don't forget the fact that Aquaman and Wonder Woman are at war. And at the very least in the animated movie, this resulted in them destroying the world, literally destroying the planet. Barry has to run back in time to stop himself from saving his mother, letting her die just so that he can save the planet. But in this case, Flash literally outruns the destruction of a planet and does so in order to let his mom die. Like, holy crap, that's insane. Like, I don't know if I'd have the actual strength to do that. So to me, it's pretty ridiculous that Barry first, while in emotional turmoil, is able to outrun the destruction of the world, that's fast, and then has to sacrifice his mother. Both emotionally and physically surviving this is damn impressive. Like, he should have either exploded with the rest of the world or not have been strong enough to sacrifice his mother. I wouldn't have been able to do it. Either way, she dies, right? So like, my thought is like, at least keep your dad out of prison and give him like another decade or so, right? Damn, that was painful. And at 7, the death of Barry Allen. After being put on trial for killing Professor Zoom, Barry Allen retires and joins Iris in the 30th century. After only a few weeks of happiness though, the crisis on Infinite Earths intervenes, and Allen is captured by the Anti-Monitor and brought to 1985. According to the Anti-Monitor, the Flash was the only being capable of traveling to other universes at will, so he had to capture him so that he couldn't be free. Allen escapes and foils the Anti-Monitor's plan though to destroy the Earth with an antimatter cannon, creating a speed vortex to draw the power in, but he dies in the process as the power becomes too much for his body. It has been said that Allen travels back through time and becomes the very same lightning bolt that gave him his powers, but later it was also strongly implied that the soul of Barry Allen resides in the Speed Force, the mystical source of Valhalla open to all dead speedsters, and the place from which the living ones draw their powers. After Allen's death, Kid Flash Wally West, his nephew and sidekick, ends up taking up the mantle of the Flash. A heartbreaking moment for any longtime fans of Barry Allen who now had to accept a new character in the role. And at 6, Catwoman and Helena. With the 82 issue run that is the 2002 to 2008 Catwoman monthly series, Selina Kyle was dragged through the mud. After killing Black Mask in cold blood, after discovering that Zatanna had mind wiped her in order to set her on the right path, Selina wound up with a baby when DC's titles jumped forward 1 year in time following Infinite Crisis. She had given up on the Catwoman mantle and decided to go legit when her secret identity is revealed, and Selina realizes that it would be impossible to raise a daughter in that environment. Enlisting the aid of Batman, she fakes the deaths of herself and the baby and places the child up for adoption. The real gut-wrencher comes when she turns to Zatanna and begs her to mind wipe her again to erase all the memories of her daughter, to which Zatanna refuses. Selina is one of the most grounded, independently sufficient characters in modern comics, comics, and to see her break down like that was absolutely brutal. Having to give up a child is never easy. Halfway through into number 5, Ripped Letter. During the events of Flashpoint, both in the comics and in the animated movie The Flashpoint Paradox, Barry brings back a little souvenir for Batman. But instead of a "I survived my trip to a different timeline" t-shirt, it's actually a letter from Bruce's father, who was alive in the Flashpoint timeline. It's the only contact that Batman has ever had with one of his parents since they died. It would be a shame if something happened to it. Oh wait, that's right, Thawne decides to rip it to shreds so that it couldn't even be reassembled. It also didn't help that Thomas was the reason Thawne was killed in the Flashpoint timeline, so yeah, this was certainly a way to get back at Thomas, even though he was dead this time around. But I mean, like, who cares? It was super unnecessary for Reverse Flash to do this, but it was still quite an emotional moment for both Bruce and the readers, which is also confusing since in the Dark Multiverse story, Reverse Flash actually saves both Bruce Wayne and his parents in order for there to be no Batman to oppose him in Reverse Flash's perfect universe. But this seems like another good way to stick it to Batman, who can never really be happy. And at 4, Clark says goodbye. As if the cover alone wasn't a dead giveaway that All-Star Superman number 6 would hold some truly teary-eyed scenes, Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely bombarded readers with emotion through one of the most potent stories in Superman's history. The last few pages of the issue sees a younger Clark speaking at Jonathan Kent's funeral, where he is witnessed unknowingly by his future self. The teardrops come once Ma and Clark are back on the farm, and young Clark is questioning the point of his powers if he couldn't save his dad. Of all the times that Jonathan Kent has died in the comics, or even in film for that matter, All-Star Superman number 7 nails it right on the head in terms of genuine emotion. Morrison serves us the best incarnation of the Man of Steel, unrelentingly human. Getting close to the end, and in number 3, Ralph finds Sue's body. I think that in general, Identity Crisis number 1 may be the saddest DC comic ever. There is not one moment of joy within these pages, but when Ralph Dibny, the elongated man, found his wife and soulmate Sue Dearborn dead in their home, burnt to a crisp, you're a soulless bastard if you didn't wipe a tear from your eye. Firstly, seeing Ralph's rubbery mouth drop open because he's too emotional to literally keep himself together while kneeling desperately in the rain clutching Sue's body is a great image of itself, but ow. And then right next to that panel there's a close-up of a positive pregnancy test and a note that says "Daddy, 2 lines equals positive." That's cruel. Identity Crisis is definitely the saddest comic event ever, but this moment takes the cake for the most depressing moment in the history of all the Crisis events. As a person who loves love and thinks that it's one of the best things in the world when you have it, this is literally my worst fear. I would have hated to be in Ralph's shoes in these moments. Like, I can get behind like stretching myself at will, that seems like it would be fun, but having to deal with this, no. No thank you. Penultimately, in at number 2, Aqua Baby. In quite possibly the most messed up death in DC Comics history, we meet Arthur Curry Jr., aka Aqua Baby. Trust me, I wish I was kidding. Up until 1977, the notion of straight up killing anyone off for real in comics was a rare notion. But Adventure Comics number 452 changed that idea entirely. Black Manta kidnaps Aqua Baby and places him in a chamber that slowly fills with air, suffocating him slowly over time. Because you know he's Aqua Baby, not a normal baby, so instead of water it fills with air, yeah. Manta forces Aquaman and Aqualad to fight each other to save Junior's life, but by the time they're done, it's too late. When the fight ends, Aquaman's son is dead, Aquaman and Aqualad's relationship is ruined, and Mira now mourns her infant son. This event actually ends up leading to the divorce of Aquaman and Mira, which given who played her in the Aquaman movies, I feel like he dodged a bullet there. But again, like I said, love. And the love you have for your own child is incredible unless you're a monster. So being unable to save your son would be an absolute atrocity in my mind. Like I wouldn't be able to deal with that. That's no. And finally, into number 1, Blackest Night. With Jeff Johns at the helm, the lore of the Green Lantern Corps in 2000 grew exponentially, introducing the emotional spectrum of light and 6 other Lantern Corps that were established across the universe. All of this was in preparation for one of the most emotionally charged events in the DC Universe's history, Blackest Night. Without going too deep into things, a creature called Necron reanimates the dead, humans and superheroes alike, and tries to eliminate all life from the universe. It's creepy, right? But here's where it gets really messed up. Any character that was brought back to life is also subject to Necron's control. To give you an idea, Superman, Green Arrow, Wonder Woman, Superboy, and Bart Allen are all brought back and under Necron's control, who, at this point, is manipulating Batman and vomiting Black Lantern rings. Watching heroes fight against their friends is hard enough, but when readers realize the majority of the core Justice League and Titans just became zombies, this became an instant page-turner, and would surely be difficult for anyone in that situation. Like, yeah, they're zombies, but in a world with zombies and a man who can travel through time and other realities at will, you'd think that there'd be a way to stop them from being zombies and back to being normal humans and alive. So you wouldn't want to put them down again, but you kinda have to. It's a turmoil for sure.
Number 10. Emma Frost learns her Hellions fate. During the time when Emma Frost led the Hellions, many of them ultimately ended up dead when caught in a battle with Trevor Fitzroy and his Sentinels. Emma herself ended up in a psychic coma, and issues later in issue 311 of X-Men, when she awoke, she ended up swapping bodies with Iceman. So it's important to note that for pretty much all of this story arc, she does look like Iceman because she's in his body, so don't let that confuse you. Emma struggled with the revelation that the Hellions had been killed while in her care. Anytime Emma faces losing a student or child in her charge, it's pretty much the most sad in comics. Emma may be a lot of things, sometimes a hero, sometimes a villain, but the fact remains that she is a great teacher who very much cares for the children she looks after and trains. Number 9. Spider-Man Reign. Pretty much this entire limited series is depressing. I don't think I actually cried when reading it, but I definitely was severely bummed out by it. And if you haven't read it, be prepared to get bummed if you do. In Spider-Man Reign, we get to see a much older and much more senile Peter Parker. This version of him has less hope and is now retired from being Spider-Man. He works as a florist and struggles even to get that right, and he's lost MJ. And he kind of lost MJ as a result of his own involvement with her. I'm not gonna get into it because I don't think I can even say it on YouTube, but basically he's the reason that MJ died. Even when he tries to resurface to save the city from re-emerging villains and the police state that it has become, he struggles and gets his butt whooped a lot. And I mean a lot. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are enjoying this super sad list, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. The Origin of Somnus. This one is sad in kind of like a happy way. It's like, it just pulls on your heartstrings. In the Marvel Voices Pride issue, we got maybe one of the sweetest Akihiro aka Daken stories ever. Akihiro decides that there is someone who passed away recently, a mutant, who deserves a second shot at life in Krakoa, a second chance to truly be seen and be happy. That is Carl Valentino. Carl's mutant power allows him to control dreams, an oneromancer, meaning that Carl and Daken's one-night stand actually felt like a lifetime to Akihiro, a lifetime they spent together, and in the dream they were happy. It was a dream that Akihiro says he never knew he wanted, but it was too much for him inevitably at the time, so he ran. Carl lived out his life while Daken raged on for decades. Because of the period that Carl grew up in, he was unable to really reveal his true self, or to feel like he could reveal his true self to those around him, to let them know that he was gay. So while his life was happy, Akihiro felt Carl had never really gotten a chance to live truthfully as the person that he actually was. Because of this, Daken has him resurrected on Krakoa and is actually there when he wakes up, excited to let Valentino know that he has a second chance. Proud that he can finally be who he always wanted to be, who he always was, Carl takes the mutant name Somnus. Number 7. The Punisher finishes the job. Punisher Kills the Marvel Universe has to be up there for one of the saddest endings to a comic of all time. In this comic, Punisher sets out to get revenge on all superheroes after his family is killed as part of collateral damage in a superhero battle. He fights and kills everyone within the Marvel Universe until it's down to just him and Daredevil. Daredevil holds back from killing his friend Frank Castle, hoping he can manage to talk him down, but eventually he's also killed by Frank. However, as he lays bleeding to death, Daredevil takes the opportunity to unmask, revealing his true identity to Frank, revealing himself to actually be his friend, Matt Murdock. He tells Frank of the importance of remembering that even superheroes have other lives, like he does, or did, saying that there's always someone under the mask, Frank, but you killed us all, with his dying breath, making Frank realize that in order to finish the job, he must also take out himself, as he too is a man hiding behind a less literal mask. Number 6. Death of Grills. Grills died in the David Aja and Matt Fraction Hawkeye series from 2012. If you don't know who Grills is, you'd really need to read the series to get attached and feel the feels of his death, but to give you a brief synopsis of why his death hurt so bad, Grills is Hawkeye's well-meaning neighbor and later tenant. And if you've watched the Disney Plus Hawkeye series, he's not a LARPer in this reality anyways. He lives in the same building as Hawkeye, aka Clint Barton, whom Grills always called Hawkeye. We get to know him as a friend of Clint's, whom he sometimes goes to for advice. He's kind, funny, and just an honest character. He also feels real, which is probably why it hurts so bad when he was killed by assassin and villain the Clown, who works for the Tracksuit Draculas, or did at the time in that series. Grills, no! Grills' death and the subsequent mourning of the character starts in issue number 10 and is felt onwards throughout Clint's narrative. Number 5. Death of Karen Page. I think Karen Page's death has to be one of the most tragic moments for Daredevil in the comics, and also for Karen, who, you know, dies. It all went down in issue number 5 of the 1998 Daredevil series. Karen and Matt had both had a rough go, and were finally managing to get their lives back in order. Matt had just recovered from the Born Again story arc where Daredevil's secret identity as Matt Murdock is revealed to Kingpin, and his life ends up being destroyed by Fisk. Karen, on the other hand, had just recovered from a drug addiction and got over being falsely accused of murder, managing to break into the world of radio and become a talk show host. So it was really heartbreaking when, during a fight with Bullseye, Karen intercepted one of Daredevil's billy clubs that was taken by Bullseye and used as a weapon to target Matt. The blow by the billy club impaled Karen through her chest. Her dying words were to Matt as he cradled her in his arms, "I'll miss you." Oh, so sad. Poor Karen. Number 4. Destruction of Genosha. Probably one of the greatest tragedies to happen in the comics, especially in regards to the mutants, which, you know, I'm quite fond of. During the E is for Extinction story arc in New X-Men issue 115, we saw Genosha decimated. This previous mutant island nation had a population of over 16 million mutants, but when Cassandra Nova unleashed her wild sentinels on the place, it was easily overwhelmed and completely destroyed. All the mutants pretty much ended up dead, and even with resurrection protocols in place on Krakoa now, it will take some time before we can ever get the numbers close to what it was and bring back all those fallen mutants that were lost, including children and, you know, whole families who were wiped out. It's actually the destruction of Genosha that brought out Emma's secondary mutation, her diamond form, making her one of the tragic, pretty much lone survivors of that attack, which we learn in the following issue. Poor Emma, jeez. Emma has had a rough time in the comics. Top 10 saddest things that happened to Emma Frost. Number 3. Disbanding of the Hellions. The 2020 Hellions series was such an interesting book. I fell in love with the idea of it when it was first announced, and we learned who our team would be, and then even more so when it was released and I began to read it. I also love how when that book was announced, everyone was like, I think pass. That sounds weird. And I was like, yay, Nanny! Give me Nanny and Orphan Maker. It quickly became one of my favorite X-books, and I fell in love with the characters and their relationships with one another. So you can imagine how hard it was when I finally read the ending to Hellions in issue 18, making me emotional just thinking about it. Especially as the team disbanded and almost everyone ended up with a somewhat depressing ending. But that's the thing with the Hellions team. They're all characters still trying to find their place, and just as they thought they had found it, it was taken from them. In a land that they have been told is one of opportunity, where there is a place for all of them. Each team member now finds themselves at the ending somewhat lost upon wrapping up this story. It made sense. It was well written and well drawn and well produced, but it still broke my heart. As with many well written comedic pieces, it also ended up being one of the most poignant endings in books I have ever read. Number 2. Death of Spider-Man. The death of Spider-Man in the Ultimate Spider-Man comic. This one may have not happened in the main continuity, but Ultimate Spider-Man would become such an influential comic that it would actually go on to inspire a lot of what we saw in the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man film trilogy. Peter Parker here dies when he is just a teenager while fighting to save the people he loves. During a final fight with Norman Osborn's Green Goblin, Spider-Man seemingly kills him by bashing him with a truck a few times, but unfortunately that vehicle explodes. Having already been put through the ringer, this ends up being Spider-Man's final fatal injury and final moment, or so it would seem. Aunt May manages to rush to his side, with Peter just having enough time to tell her that he did it. He finally did it. While he might not have been able to save his Uncle Ben, this time he was at least able to save his Aunt May. Of course, it would be revealed later on that Peter managed to survive due to him basically being immortal, but at the time readers didn't know about that yet, so this death felt very final and very emotional. Number 1. Farewell from the X Factor team. One of the saddest moments for me reading comics recently was the ending of the most recent X Factor series. And although the actual ending of that comic series was also bittersweet and brought a tear to my eyes, brought a few tears to my eyes, the most heart-wrenching part actually came from after the comic was finished with the farewell letters. The last few pages of that comic feature farewell letters from artist David Baldion and writer Leah Williams, and both made me cry profusely. Baldion talked about how hard it was to say goodbye to this book and to these characters, even more so than other book endings, which of course are always challenging. These were very much our kids, he writes. It very much felt like we were holding their hands during a journey of recovery, of acceptance, of rebirth. It's always hard. It was harder this time. And not only because we went deep with them, we could feel this story meant a lot to a lot of people out there. I'm going to miss my X Factor kids so much. I've come to know them so well that it honestly feels like some family member has left and is not around anymore. In saying her farewell, Williams shared what she felt the book and the whole world of Krakoa meant to the audience. Something became very clear to us all during the pandemic. The fact that as X-writers, we were helping by giving readers a safe place to escape to in the form of Krakoa. That became my greatest wish in writing X Factor during the pandemic and all the turmoil of the past year. I wanted to give you all a safe place to retreat. I wanted you all to feel welcome in Krakoa and know that you belong here. She continues, I wanted you to feel the community and camaraderie that I feel with my peers, and know that without a doubt, you belong. I wanted to keep the gates open for you as long as I could. And I think that made me so emotional because for me, that's what the X-Men is all about. It's like you don't belong, but like finding a home and a family where you feel like you belong. It's like everyone that doesn't belong finding that place where they can be safe. And so just that revelation of that being what the comic was about broke my heart. Oh, so good. Number 10. Barry can't go back to his timeline. While the comics have tons of tragic events when it comes to the Flash, so does the Arrowverse. Tragedy has followed Barry Allen's character there as well and continues to haunt him constantly throughout the various seasons of the Flash. At one point, Barry creates a flashpoint when he successfully goes back in time and saves his mother Nora. This happens only after failing to do so a few times in the show. In season 3, he returns from that timeline, realizing he had to try and fix the divergent timeline that he'd created, but when he went back to fix it and then returned to the present, he realized that everything was still different from how it had originally been, and that he'd never be able to quite fix what he had done and revert the timeline back to how it was originally. In other words, he'd be stuck in a divergent timeline where everything was just a little bit different. This event not only affected the Flash, but also affected the entire Arrowverse. Number 9. The Flash lost his legs. But don't worry, only temporarily. Still, it was a pretty dark and tragic moment for Barry. This moment comes to us from issue 68 of the 2016 run of The Flash from Rebirth. Here, the villain known as the Trickster made it appear as though he had cut off Barry's legs, giving us a shocking cliffhanger ending for the final page of that issue. In issue 69, however, Barry manages to overcome what is revealed to be a momentary setback. His missing legs appear to be just a trick, and he is able to overcome his own pessimism to free himself from the trick and save the day in the end. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you love us as much as we love you, be sure to show that by clicking all the things. Hit subscribe, click the like, do the comment stuff, do everything. Thank you. Number 8. Final Crisis. The tragedy of this event in regards to both Flash's Wally West and Barry Allen failing their mission set us up for one very emotional moment between Barry and Iris. During Final Crisis, Barry Allen and Wally West attempted to save everyone from Darkseid by preventing the death of Orion, but they failed. As a result, the Earth was overtaken by the anti-life equation, with everyone becoming affected by it and turning into a sad, depressed husk of their former self. Barry ends up coming across across Iris, who is lost to the anti-life equation. With us believing there is likely no hope for the couple, Barry goes to kiss Iris, trying desperately to free her. Their love, combined with the Speed Force charged touch of his lips, works and Iris is freed, only highlighting though how small the glimmer of hope is in a world overrun by the anti-life equation, and how much work is still ahead. Number 7. His father's confession. Barry Allen's father Henry was wrongfully convicted of murdering his mother Nora, and it was this claim by his father, who continued to profess his innocence from the day of the murder and years afterwards, that inspired Barry to get a job within the justice system, becoming a forensic scientist for the Central City Police Department. However, after years, Henry had all but given up on the belief that he would ever be set free, and so lied to his son, confessing that he had committed the crime when still he really hadn't. This drove Barry into a frenzy, turning his entire world upside down, and caused him to destroy his lab, becoming covered in chemicals as lightning from the storm outside crashed through his window and electrocuted him, granting him super speed and allowing him to tap into the Speed Force. This accident may have come from a moment of intense tragedy, but it would also lift Barry Allen up, turning him into the hero we have come to know as the Flash. Number 6. Reverse Flash wins. One of the saddest and most terrifying realities, of course, comes to us from the Dark Multiverse. Here we are talking about the Tales of the Dark Multiverse FLASHPOINT story, where Barry Allen fails to get his powers back and instead ends up frying. This allows Eobard Thawne to win the day, and so Reverse Flash ends up replacing Barry Allen as the Flash. Barry's attempt here to regain his powers instead created something new, a darker timeline, a divergence, a dark flashpoint. This version of the Flash, Thawne's version, uses his power to defeat all the heroes in the current timeline he arrives in, manipulate the President of the United States into being his puppet, and tortures the Batman of that timeline, Thomas Wayne, with the knowledge that he, Thawne, could fix the world and put it back to normal if he wanted to, but that he doesn't want to do that. He confesses that he enjoys keeping Thomas around because Batman was aware of the way things should be, but knew how hopeless fixing everything was now that Barry was dead. Of course, in the end, he does kind of fix it for Thomas, because he's like, I'm gonna save his family just to see what'll happen, but it's not in a good way. It's not helping him in a good way, I don't think. Number 5. Everyone Forgets Wally. This was a series of tragic moments that also ended up leading to one of the most emotionally charged moments in comic book history. After the events of Flashpoint, Wally West became trapped outside the timeline, only able to peer into it through the Speed Force. Stuck in the Speed Force, Wally ventured around Earth looking for anyone who might recognize him, but no one had any memories of the speedster, and so alas, no one did recognize him. In the end, Wally found Barry and said his final goodbye to the seemingly confused hero, preparing himself to disappear permanently from existence. But then suddenly, Barry remembered Wally and was able to pull him back into the timeline and into existence. Not only did this moment make us all cry tears of joy at the two reconnecting, but the whole journey up to this moment was particularly sad and tragic, just tears all around. Number 4. Death of Bart Allen. Bart Allen was the time-displaced grandson of Barry Allen, who started off in the comics as Impulse before becoming the Flash sidekick Kid Flash, until he eventually took over for Wally West as the Flash. Bart died without even having superpowers, sacrificing himself to save others, as Flashes so often do. After becoming depowered, Bart pretended to still have his super speed in order to distract a group of villains known as the Rogues, long enough for his girlfriend to disarm the device that had depowered him, and also threatened to blow up all of Los Angeles. Unfortunately, without the Speed Force, he was no match for them and ended up being brutally killed in the fight. His death happened in the pages of The Flash, The Fastest Man Alive in issue 13, and a funeral followed in issue 43 of Countdown. Fortunately, Bart would return to life during the events of Final Crisis. Cause you know, it's still comic books. Number 3. Death of Nora Allen. In the CW Arrowverse, we got to see Barry Allen experience his mother's death firsthand. He attempted to go back to the moment that she died during season 1 in an attempt to try and save her, but was prevented from doing so by his future self, who warned him that he basically couldn't get involved. Arriving in time but unable to do anything, he had to watch again as his mother was attacked and killed. As she lay dying, he approached her and revealed himself to be the Flash and her adult son, Barry Allen, attempting to comfort her, at least in her last few moments, by letting her know that in the future her son would grow up to be okay and her husband was also doing fine. Nora and Barry both smiled tearfully as they said their final goodbyes. This scene always makes me sad. It always makes me cry. Number 2. Heroes in Crisis. Wally was being treated at Sanctuary with other superheroes and some redeemed villains turned hero when he snapped. The strain of the new continuity which he was aware of, making him feel terribly alone, and the combination of taking a peek at the records belonging to other supers who had come through there got to him and caused him to lose control of his powers. The murder mystery story would later reveal that it was actually Wally West who was responsible for the Sanctuary massacre, and that Wally had attempted to cover up what he had done to help him buy some time to fix it. This event turned Wally into a bona fide villain in the comics, who later would have to pay for his crimes, even though they were accidental. I mean, he didn't mean to do it. Not only was this sad for Wally in the comics, but it was also a sad moment for Wally West fans everywhere. Because this was not the Wally West we wanted. We were like, we didn't ask for this, Wally West. Can we get a refund? Where's Happy Wally? Number 1. New 52. One of the saddest things to have happened to Wally West, in my opinion, was the DC reset that wiped out his family. Because Wally had been pulled out of the continuity by Dr. Manhattan and then inserted back into it, he still had the memories of his New Earth life prior to New 52. He remembered his marital bliss, his children, his happy family, but now they were all remarkably missing. The love of his life, Linda Park, didn't remember who he was, and they didn't have a relationship here. Linda had her own thing kinda going on. His children were just nowhere to be found, and this actually set him down a path of trying to figure out what had happened to them. Eventually he would find his children again and save them, but Linda would prove more of a moral conundrum for him, especially as he realized that with his touch he could give people back their memories from the prior continuity. And it was actually this position of remembering everything that made Wally basically go insane and kind of prompted the events of Heroes in Crisis. While that was tragic, I think living in a displaced continuity where you feel completely out of place is even more sad.